My sister threw a glass of champagne in my face at her own wedding reception, in front of 200 people, while I was 7 months pregnant. Not because I did something wrong, because I asked her, quietly, at the edge of the head table, if I could have the envelope back. The one, with $18,000 in it, that she'd promised to return by the end of the night. She smiled at the people nearest to us, picked up her glass and said, "You really can't let anyone have anything, can you?" And then she emptied it into my face. My mother, standing 3 feet away, turned back to the photographer and said, "Can we get one more of the whole family?" I was standing there, champagne dripping off my eyelashes, one hand on my belly, and I understood, with a clarity I had never had before in my life, that I was never going to be their family. I was their bank, and I had just closed the account. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually starts. My name is Corinne. I'm 29 years old, and I live in Columbus, Ohio, and what I'm about to tell you is the truest thing I have ever said out loud. Where are you watching this right now? What city? What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. It sounds like a small thing to ask, but knowing you're out there, that someone is listening to this makes it easier to say. So go ahead. I'll be here. I grew up in a 3-bedroom house, in a suburb outside of Dayton, that was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business, but pretended not to. My parents, I'll call them by what they were to me growing up, because their actual names don't matter as much as the roles they played. My father worked as a regional sales manager for a mid-size packaging company, and my mother was a part-time dental receptionist who spent the other part of her time managing the idea of our family. What I mean by that is she was obsessed with appearances. Not cruelty, not love, not warmth. Appearances. Whether the Christmas cards looked right. Whether the neighbors knew we had gone to Hilton Head that summer. Whether my sister and I were performing the version of ourselves that reflected well on her. My sister Dani was 2 years younger than me, and from the time she could walk, she was the one who got it. The one who knew how to turn our mother's love on and get it aimed at her like a spotlight. Dani was louder than me, prettier in the way people notice first, and she had figured out early that crying in front of our father got her things, and laughing in front of our mother kept the peace. I was quieter, more internal, the kind of kid who kept a notebook and liked math, and read the back of cereal boxes 3 times because the information was there, and I wanted to know it. I was not difficult. I was just not performing, and in my family, those 2 things were treated as the same. By high school, the pattern was clear. Dani got the car for her 16th birthday. I got told I should look into the work-study program at the community pool. Dani's college applications got edited by a tutor my parents paid $200 an hour for. I was handed a library book about essay writing and told I was smart enough to figure it out. I figured it out. I got a partial scholarship to Ohio State and covered the rest with student loans, a waitressing job Thursday through Sunday, and a grim kind of determination that I think only children who have been told they're capable as a substitute for being helped truly understand. What capable means in those families is, we're not going to help you, and we'd like you to be okay with that. I was not okay with it, but I was also not going to let them be right about me. I graduated with a degree in accounting, passed my CPA exam on the first try, and was hired at a mid-size regional firm in Columbus before my diploma had finished printing. Within 4 years, I was a senior associate. Within 6, I had a client portfolio that my managing partner described, in front of the entire office, as the kind of work we recruit for but rarely find. I was 27 when I crossed $95,000 in annual salary. I had an emergency fund, a Roth IRA, a used Subaru I'd bought outright, and a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I loved. I also had a boyfriend named Patrick, who had been watching my family operate for 3 years with the quiet, increasingly concerned expression of a man who knows something is wrong, but doesn't know yet how wrong, he would say. Sometimes, after I'd gotten off a phone call with my mother, where she'd somehow turned a conversation about my dentist appointment into a request for $800 for Dani's car insurance. "Cor, you don't have to." And I would say, "She's my family." And he would say, "I know," in the way that meant, "That doesn't mean what you think it means." I kept saying yes anyway. 1,000 here, 1,200 there. I paid for the lawyer when my parents had a dispute with their homeowner's insurance after a tree branch hit the garage. I paid for the vet when their dog needed surgery. I paid 3 months of Dani's rent when she decided, at 24, that her apartment in Cincinnati wasn't working for her, and she needed a few months to figure out her next move. The few months became 6. I never asked for any of it back. I told myself it was generosity. Looking back, I think it was a habit I had learned so early it had stopped feeling like a choice. The trap was set about 8 months before the wedding. Dani had gotten engaged to a man named, I'll just call him her fiancé, because that's what he was and I prefer to leave him out of this, who came from a family with money, old money, the kind that doesn't announce itself but is present in every detail of how people move through the world. His mother wore a single strand of pearls and had very specific opinions about table linen, and his father had taken one look at our family at the engagement dinner and smiled the smile of a man doing rapid calculations. Danny was desperate to impress them. This is where my mother came to me. It was a Tuesday. She called me at 7:30 in the morning, which was always the signal that something was coming that she'd been rehearsing. She said his family had a lake house in Michigan and had offered to host the wedding there, a destination wedding, and that it was an incredible opportunity for Danny. Didn't I think so? I said I did. She said the only thing was that it would require a deposit to reserve the vendors, caterer, florist, photographer, and that the deposit total came to $22,000, and that she and my father simply didn't have that available right now. But she knew that I did, because I was so good with money. I'd always been so good with money, and it wouldn't be forever, just until they could get things sorted, and of course Danny would pay me back, after the wedding, once the gift money came in. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. Part of me knew. I think I had always known. But there is a version of yourself that you maintain. A kind of interior fiction that the people who made you love you in the ways you need. And I was not ready to give that up. I said I'd think about it. My mother called back 2 hours later. Danny called an hour after that. Danny was sweet about it in a way she only ever was when she needed something. And I recognized it, and I handed over the money anyway. $22,000. I wrote it as a check because my mother said the venue preferred it. I told Danny I needed it back within 90 days of the wedding. She said of course. She said, Cor, I would never. Patrick sat across from me at the kitchen table that night and did not say I told you so. He just asked, very carefully, how I was feeling, and I said fine. And he looked at me the way he looked at me when he was deciding whether to push. And then he said, okay, and that was the end of it. The wedding was in July, at the lake house in northern Michigan. It was genuinely beautiful. I want to say that, because it was. White tents on a property that sloped down to the water, lights strung between birch trees, a 4-piece band that played Etta James during the cocktail hour. I was 7 months pregnant. Patrick and I had found out in February, and it was the best thing that had happened in my life. A fact so complete and uncomplicated that it surprised me with its weight every single morning. I was tired at the wedding. My feet were swollen. The drive up had taken 7 hours because we'd stopped twice. And I'd slept in the car with my seat reclined while Patrick drove. And I held his hand across the center console. But I was trying to be present. I was trying to be happy for my sister. I made it to 9 p.m. before the pain in my lower back became the kind that required me to sit down somewhere quiet. And I found Danny between the speeches and the cake cutting, standing near the head table, flushed and bright-eyed, and I leaned in close so no one could hear me and I said, hey, I'm going to need to head out soon. Can we figure out the envelope situation before I go? We had agreed that she would have a cashier's check in an envelope, $18,000. She'd said the gift money hadn't fully come in yet, but that she'd have most of it, waiting for me at the reception. That was her waiting. The smile left her face, not all at once. It went in stages like something dimming. She looked at me for a second, and then she looked around, and then she picked up her glass of champagne, and she turned back to me and she said, loud enough that the couple next to her could hear, you really can't let anyone have anything, can you? And she threw it at me. The champagne hit my face, my hair, the front of my dress. I felt it cold on my collarbone, running down the inside of my neckline. I was 7 months pregnant, and I was standing in a white tent in northern Michigan, dripping champagne, and I looked at my mother, who was 3 feet away, and she turned to the photographer and asked for one more of the whole family. I did not cry. I want to say that clearly. I have thought about that moment many times since, and the thing that surprises me is that I did not cry. I think I had used up all the tears I had available for these people years before this. What I felt instead was very still. The way a room gets still before a storm. Patrick saw my face before he saw the champagne. He was walking toward me from across the tent when it happened, and I watched him understand what had occurred in the order that he encountered the information. My expression first, then my dress, then Danny with her empty glass, then my mother already pivoting away. He came to me and he said nothing. He put his jacket around my shoulders and his hand at the small of my back and he said quietly, "Are you ready to go?" I said, "Give me 10 minutes. What I did in those 10 minutes will seem, to some people, like it was too much. Other people will say I didn't do enough." I walked over to where my father was standing near the bar with the father of the groom. Both of them, with glasses of something amber, and a look of men who had finished their obligations for the evening. I stood in front of my father, and I told him that I would be sending a formal demand letter for the $22,000 within the week, and that if it was not repaid within 30 days, I would be filing in small claims court for amounts under $10,000 and civil court for the remainder. I want to tell you what my father said, because it stays with me. He looked at me, at his 7-month pregnant daughter, wet with champagne, and he said, "Don't be dramatic, Corinne. It was a joke." I said, "The $22,000 wasn't." Then I walked to the parking area where Patrick was already waiting with the car. My feet were swollen, and the gravel was difficult to walk across in the low heels I was wearing, and I kept my eyes straight ahead the whole time. We drove 4 hours to a hotel in Grand Rapids that night, because neither of us wanted to stay. Patrick drove. I sat in the passenger seat with a hotel washcloth I'd grabbed from our room, and I cleaned the champagne off my face and neck, and I looked out the window at the dark Michigan highway, and I thought about the $22,000, and I thought about my daughter. We knew she was a girl. We had known for months. I had a name picked out that I hadn't told anyone yet. And I thought about how much I wanted her to never, in her life, experience what I had experienced in that tent. That was the night I stopped trying to be part of that family. And I started being part of mine. The demand letter went out 8 days later. My firm's small business attorney drafted it, and I paid for it out of my own account. And she waived half her fee when I told her what had happened, which I thought was one of the kindest things anyone had done for me in a long time. The letter was specific, documented, and legally precise. It referenced the original check, the cashed deposit records, the written text message exchange with Danny where she had confirmed the repayment timeline. Patrick had screenshot those months ago, without telling me, because he is methodical in ways I have learned to simply accept and be grateful for. My mother called me 4 times the first day the letter arrived. I did not answer. She left 2 voicemails. The first one asked if I was serious. The second one said I was going to ruin the family over money, which I found interesting because I had been quietly holding the family together, with money for the better part of a decade, and it had never once been called the thing that kept us together. Danny called once. She did not leave a voicemail. My father sent a text that said, "This isn't how we handle things." I wrote back, "It is now. The thing about having financially supported a family for years is that when you stop, the silence is very loud and very fast. I had been paying my parents' cell phone bill as part of a family plan I'd set up years before. I disconnected them from it. I had been auto-transferring $600 a month to a shared account my mother used for household things. I stopped the transfer. I had a storage unit in Dayton that I'd been paying for, because Danny had asked me to hold some furniture after her last move. I called the facility, gave 30 days notice, and let her know in a single text that she had 30 days to retrieve her belongings, or they would be released. She did not respond to that text either. The civil filing went through 6 weeks postpartum. I want to be honest about that timeline too, because I was running on 4 hours of sleep and a level of determination that surprised even me. Our daughter was born in September, healthy and loud, and so completely herself, from the first minute, that I felt something rearrange in my chest when I held her. Some prior version of what I thought love was quietly stepping aside for the real thing. Patrick held her first because I was still on the table, and he looked at her for a long moment, and then he looked at me and he said, "She's got your eyes," and I said, "She just got here." And he laughed, and I think that was the moment I understood that we were going to be okay. We were going to be more than okay. The civil case moved faster than I expected. I had documentation that most plaintiffs in contract disputes don't have. The original check, the bank records showing it cleared, the text messages confirming the agreement, and a witness. Patrick, who had been present for 2 separate conversations in which my mother had confirmed the repayment terms. Danny's attorney filed a response arguing the money was a gift. The text messages made that argument difficult to sustain. In the messages, Danny had written, verbatim, "I'll have it back to you by the end of the reception, promise. You're literally saving my life right now." Gifts, the judge noted, are not typically accompanied by repayment schedules. My mother was called to testify about the original arrangement. She maintained under oath that the money had been given freely. The judge did not find her credible. I was not in the courtroom. I was at home, on our couch, with our daughter in a carrier on my chest, and my laptop open on the coffee table, watching the live stream of the civil proceedings that Patrick had figured out how to set up through the county court's public access system. I watched my mother sit in the witness box and describe the version of our family that existed only in her head. The one where she was a devoted mother and I was a volatile, difficult daughter who had chosen, for reasons she could not explain, to make trouble over nothing. I had heard versions of this story my whole life. Hearing it in a courtroom under oath, with a judge looking at the check and the texts on a screen beside her, was different. It was the first time the story had to compete with evidence. The judgment came down 14 days later. Danny was ordered to repay $18,500. The original $22,000 minus the $3,500 the court attributed to genuine gifted contributions at the time of the agreement, plus court costs. She had 60 days to comply or face wage garnishment. My father was not a party to the suit, which he had taken to mean he had escaped consequences. He had not. Because I had been quietly included on several of their financial accounts over the years, added on for convenience, my mother always said, so I could help if they needed it. I had spent the weeks after the wedding doing something I had never thought to do before. Reading them. all the way through, and what I found was that over the course of 7 years, I had been paying for things I had not agreed to pay for. Auto renewals on accounts I'd been added to without my knowledge. A credit card opened in my name and my father's, jointly, that had $6,400 on it. I had not opened that card. I had not signed anything for it. My name was on it. I reported it to all 3 credit bureaus and filed a police report. The investigation is still ongoing, which is why I won't say more than that. What I will say is that when I called the credit card company and asked them to walk me through the application process for the account, including the date, time, and IP address of the application, the address entered was my parents' home address, and my father had listed himself as the primary cardholder. I changed everything, every password, every account, every contact. I had my name removed from every shared financial instrument that could legally be separated. The cell phones went dark. The monthly transfer stopped. The storage unit was released. I had been the infrastructure of that family, the quiet, invisible system that kept the lights on and the crisis at bay. And I shut it down so completely that I think they are still, somewhere, trying to understand what happened. Danny satisfied the judgment in full at 58 days. I do not know if she borrowed it, sold something, or had help from her husband's family. I did not ask and I do not care. The check arrived certified mail and I deposited it the same afternoon. And then I sat in my car in the parking lot of the bank for a few minutes and looked at the receipt and felt something I did not expect. Not triumph. Not relief, exactly. More like the feeling of finally setting down something very heavy that you had carried so long. You had forgotten what your own arms felt like unloaded. Patrick found me in the parking lot. He had driven separately because we'd been running errands in different directions. And he pulled up next to me and rolled down his window. And I held up the deposit receipt, and he looked at it. And then he looked at me and he said, "You want to go get lunch?" I said yes. We went to a diner we like in our neighborhood, and I had the mushroom omelet, and he had the turkey club. And our daughter sat in the booth between us in her infant seat and looked at the ceiling fan with the expression of someone encountering a profound mystery. And it was, I think, one of the best meals of my life. I want to answer the question I know you're going to ask, because I have asked it myself more times than I can count. Why did I keep giving them money for so long? And the honest answer is that I believed if I gave enough, something would eventually shift. That the check I wrote would be the one that finally made them look at me the way I had needed them to look at me since I was 8 years old and realizing, slowly, that being capable wasn't the same as being loved. That is the lie that families like mine tell capable children, and it works for years because you keep waiting for the day the lie runs us out. Mine ran out at a wedding, in a white tent, with champagne drying on my collarbone. I don't talk to my parents. I don't talk to my sister. I have sent one email, through an attorney, making clear that any contact directed toward me, or Patrick or our daughter, will be forwarded to our legal team without response. There has been no contact since. My daughter is 4 months old now. She smiles at Patrick when he makes a specific face at her that I can't describe, except to say it is undignified and she loves it. She smells like that particular smell that infant heads have, which I was not prepared for. I had heard about it, but I had not understood it would feel like something being reprogrammed inside me. Every morning I pick her up from her crib and I think, not consciously, but somewhere behind my thoughts, you are never going to wonder if you're loved. You are never going to mistake being useful for being wanted. That is the only thing I know for sure I am getting right. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I mean it honestly. Do you think I went too far? My sister didn't take the money at gunpoint. She asked. I gave, and when she threw the champagne she was drunk and angry and probably scared. My mother didn't forge the credit card. That was my father. My mother just looked away every time I needed her to look at me. Is looking away the same as harm? I've been thinking about that question for 4 months and I still don't have an answer that settles completely. Tell me what you think, and if this story is the one that made you feel less alone in something you've been carrying. If you've ever been the capable one, the one who figures it out, the one who holds it together while everyone else moves through the world like the infrastructure is just there. Please subscribe. New stories go up every week. You are not alone in this, and you never have to earn the right to be someone's family.